All right, so I'm going to try to do this thing instead of the thing that I normally do. We're just kind of flex and work with it. So we've been working through the book of James for a while now, and we've made it to the beginning of chapter 3. And this morning, James is going to talk specifically about the tongue. All right, but before we get into that, I should tell y'all a little story. It's not the Christmas story, but last week I decided after my haircut that I would stop by the Romine house just to check in and see if, maybe I could help with anything, which was my first mistake. And I walked in and they had their calendars open and they were planning their week ahead. And so, in a moment of weakness, I was like, well, is there anything I can do to help? And fast forward to today, and here we are, right? And so, as I began to sit down and prepare for this week, I open up the Bible to James 3, verse 1, and I read, "Let not many of you become teachers, brothers and sisters, knowing that as such we will incur a stricter judgment." So, thank you for the encouragement. So we're all here today, and clearly I'm not following James's advice, but since we're here, let's get into this thing a little bit. All right, so getting into James 3, at its core, this verse emphasizes the seriousness of being a teacher in the faith. All right, teaching holds a unique responsibility because it shapes others' understanding of God and their spiritual walk. And I believe James is reminding us that God will hold teachers accountable, not necessarily to punish them, but because their influence is so significant. James may also be warning against the temptation to seek the role of teacher for status or recognition, especially in the early church where teaching carried respect. So it's not a role to take lightly or pursue casually. And then the other question that came up for me was stricter judgment from who? From God? From the church? From one's own consciousness? And I'm not entirely sure, but this highlights the importance of faithfulness and integrity to the calling. One thing that seems evident is there is an increased level of accountability for teachers that stems from the natural consequence of being in a position where others scrutinize what you say and do. All right? So there is a presumed authority that comes with teaching that leaves you open for people to closely examine what you say. And this is actually a really good thing, right? This is protection for the church. And it's the same thing that Paul is talking about in 1 Corinthians chapter 14, where he says that they should let the prophets speak and then let other people pass judgment on what they say. So the whole church has a responsibility to scrutinize the things that are put before them. And I think James is tapping into that idea. It's a good thing to want to understand the scripture and then share it with people, but you need to be prepared for challenges that are going to come up. People will engage with your message, and they may even agree with the content of what you're saying, but they may not appreciate how it's delivered. In fact, Paul complained a little to the Corinthians about them not liking what he had to say, and they called his speech contemptible, and that kind of bummed him out. So James is saying that there is going to be a closer view on what a teacher has to say, and that is appropriate, but he is warning them about it. And then he follows up with verse 2. This says, "For we all stumble in many ways. If anyone does not stumble in what he says, he is a perfect man, able to bridle the whole body as well." So James is bringing up what is almost everybody's downfall, which is your mouth. All right? And that's what he's going to be talking about here. So you can have your act together in a lot of ways. You can do a decent job of avoiding like the more obvious moral hangups, but it is really hard to keep control of your mouth. So James is going to give us this description of the tongue. And he says, "Now, if we put bits in the horses' mouths so that they will obey us, we direct their entire body as well. Look at ships also, though they are so great and are driven by strong winds, and still directed by a very small rudder, wherever the inclination of the pilot desires. So also the tongue is a small part of the body, and yet it boasts of great things. See how great a forest is set aflame by such a small fire." And then he says, "And the tongue is a fire, the very world of iniquity. The tongue is set among our members as that which defiles the entire body, and sets on fire the course of our life, and is set on fire by hell. For every species of bird, beast and bird, of reptile and creature of the sea, is tamed and has been tamed by the human race. But no one can tame the tongue. It is a restless evil and full of deadly poison." So, all right, James, like, tell us how you really feel, you know? But that's James. He's using exaggeration and vivid word pictures to help us to remember his message. The tongue is like the rudder of a giant ship, or like the bit that you put in a horse's mouth. The tongue is a consuming fire that is lit by hell itself. These are easy things to remember, and if you do remember any of those things, those images, then James has succeeded in what he's trying to do. He's trying to get you to take seriously the idea that a bunch of problems happen because of the words that come out of our mouths. Our mouths really do get us into trouble. So we'll examine what James is presenting here as he lays it out in a topical and memorable way. We'll also reflect on his message and recognize that he's drawing from a lot of wisdom of the Proverbs, as he is presuming his audience is familiar with it. So we'll end up in Proverbs, where we will also talk about the positive ways that we can use our mouths. All right, so then James says, "With the tongue we bless our Lord and Father, and with it we curse men who have been made in the likeness of God. From the same mouth come both blessing and cursing. My brothers and sisters, these things ought not to be this way. Does a fountain set out from the same opening both fresh and bitter water? Can a fig tree, my brothers and sisters, produce olives, or a vine produce figs? Nor can salt water produce fresh water." So it is clear that the focus of this whole passage is the tongue. And there are some very cool things about the tongue. The way that it is being used here, the tongue represents the gift of language that God has uniquely given to human beings. So animals communicate through sound and body language and pheromones, often reflecting like instinctual programming aimed at influencing their own species. And cross-species communication is like simpler than that. They rely on just tone and body language with very little nuance. But in contrast, humans are uniquely designed by God for complex communication, as evidenced by our specialized physiology and brain function. And this, of course, has to do with being made in the image of God. God is personal, and God is a communicator. So in his image, we are also. The gift of language is not just the ability to affect people by the grunts and barks that we make. It is to speak to them words that they can then interpret and understand the deep things that are going on in our hearts and minds. It is one of the things that helps to make us very social beings, and it enables us to come together and form real bonds. It enables me to link up with you in a way that enables us to express real love and real relationship with one another. So the gift of language is uniquely human. In our cosmos, it is only human beings that are really language users. So like computers and AI can be programmed to simulate it, but they're not actually doing what we do. Language is a beautiful thing. And then he says that we use it to bless our Lord, but we also use it to curse the men that are made in his image. So there is a deep moral and spiritual problem with man. And the truest evidence of that is the things that come out of our mouths, the hateful things that we say, and the way that we tear people down. Words have incredible power. Y'all remember the old saying, the pen is mightier than the sword? And in a certain sense, this is true. Words do have power. And I was thinking about that some. Like, I bet that there are words that every single one of us remembers that were spoken maybe decades ago, but are still fresh in your mind. Maybe something that somebody said in anger, or maybe just without thinking, or maybe they were teasing you. But those spoken words opened up deep insecurities that you have about yourself. I can remember some stuff like that. But maybe you can also remember things on the positive side as well, right? Are there any words that were spoken to you by people that were important to you in your life? Maybe they expressed confidence in who you are or what your capacities are. And those words have emboldened you to accomplish specific things in your life. Words matter. The things that we say do make a difference. And there are also words that we would like to have back, right? Some of us would like to have most of the things that we say back. Some of us don't fully realize what we're thinking until after we say it. Then upon hearing ourselves, we think, that didn't quite sound right. I do that sometimes, right? But the disadvantage here is that other people are hearing you say this stuff, and you can't get that back. It's like a dagger that's been thrown. Sometimes it sticks, sometimes it doesn't, but you're not getting it back. So if you say something thoughtless, snarky, cynical, unguarded, unkind, you may have just buried that dagger in the chest of someone that you really love or care about. And a lot of us learn in close relationships, in our marriages, with our kids, that there are certain words that we can use that tear that other person right up. And maybe, if you are one of these kinds of people who have a quick tongue, what James is saying this morning is very important for you to listen to. This is going to be a critical battlefield in the success of the relationships in your life. All right, so there are also words that are left unspoken that shouldn't be. Some of us are quick-tongued, causing harm with the things that we say. Others are quick to judge those who misspeak, yet we do our damage by remaining silent when words are needed most. Our silence robs us of the chance to speak strength into someone else's life. And too often, we value our comfort over caring enough to break silence and truly connect with those around us. So we do have some problems in these areas, but I also think that we have some opportunities here as well. And I want to highlight those opportunities through here this morning. James says that from the same mouth come blessing and cursing. So we're going to talk about that. All right, some practical spiritual relating. And this kind of relating with one another is the backdrop of what James is talking about. And not just in general principles, but specifically in what he is addressing. So you can look back at Proverbs and see these recurring themes that drive that book, like the fool versus the wise man, stuff like that. This contrast is often made in the context of talking about the tongue and the things that we say. So there are like 4 or 5 categories of Proverbs that relate to the tongue and to our discussion here. And the first is from Proverbs 15:23. It says, "A man has joy in an apt answer, and how delightful is a timely word." So he's talking about words that are fitting, and that's important. Words that are fitting provide personal encouragement in a particular point and time in a person's life. So that's what he's talking about here when he says apt or timely. Not just saying something that's generally true, but saying something that is true in this particular situation and is relevant to this person's life right now. And James is saying that that is the way we ought to be relating to one another. So fitting words, also intentional words that are relevant and thoughtful. So all this presumes that the way that we're relating to each other is not really just like stream of consciousness or just spontaneously in the moment, although those things are fine and good. But there's another necessary element that we should be intentional in the things that we say to one another. When we speak intentionally and thoughtfully, we show others that we've been thinking about them and listening. Even if we don't know how to respond immediately, it's okay to take some time to reflect. That's how I am. Like, I'm not a in-the-moment kind of guy. I'm more of a, like, let me sit on this and think about it. Right? But you can return later with a thoughtful, apt word that shows that their words mattered to us and that we value them. And this is a part of what Christian community is supposed to look like, where we are relating to one another in this intentional way. And this raises a question. Do you prayerfully consider the things that you say to the people around you? Your spouse and your kids, right? Lots of us are really good at talking about sports or the weather or knives or plants or cars, movies, your job, how proud you are of your children, you know. And that's all good stuff to talk about. There's nothing wrong with that. But how would you feel if you wore a device around your neck that measured the quality of the content of everything that you said? And what if that device kept track of the things that you talk about the most and then like printed out like a spreadsheet or like a pie chart at the end of the day? Would it say that you talk about yourself the most? Do you think that other people are just as interested in you as you are in yourself? That's typically not the case. Would it say that most of what you say is totally trivial? So we need to consider whether or not we are deliberate about what we bring to the table when we're with people. We are supposed to have something to say that we've thought about, considered, and prayed about. So think about that. Do you bring an apt answer? All right, so here's another proverb. This is 10, 20, and 21. And there are a couple points to bring out here. So, the tongue of the righteous is as choice silver. The lips of the righteous feed many. So now we're talking about not just timely words, but we're talking about words that feed. And what this means is that there are words that have the capacity to satisfy a deep hunger within another person. Food meets our physical needs in a lot of ways, but there are needs that our soul has that only words can penetrate. We all need encouragement and sometimes correction. At times, we need our thoughts and feelings to align with the wisdom of those we trust, the people we rely on during moments of confusion or uncertainty. And that is what the proverb is teaching here. When we speak to each other, it is though we are feeding people. We are able to refresh them with a biblical perspective on their life. We get perspective from all over the place, right? Through the media, through work, through all manner of things. We live within a system that is not value neutral. So social psychologists and advertisers use data, and it absolutely is able to demonstrate that you can shape people's desires through how things are presented to them. I even read recently that you can actually change people's memory by suggestion and words alone. So there are all manner of things that we believe. There are all manner of influences that are competing for our affections and for our thought life. And we desperately need to have relationships where we are able and willing to speak to one another in truth and in love. That is why the lips of the righteous feed many, because our heads get stuck in the clouds and in weird places sometimes. And the things that people around us say have the capacity to bring us back to earth and ground us. And so do you relate to one another like that? It's cool what Peter says about this in 1 Peter 4. He says, "Whoever speaks, do it as one who is speaking the utterances of God." So that could be a pretty good caution for some of us. Like, as you are considering what you want to say, and you're just about to open your mouth, like, pause, ask yourself, is this the kind of thing that God would say? So maybe we should spend some more time being silent. Maybe we should really prayerfully consider my next words and choose them carefully. Content really does matter. And there's another point that's crucial for us to get here, and that is in our times of reflection, in your prayer time, in our own Bible study time, do we ever seek insight for other people from God? Do you ever sit through a Bible study and you think, man, that was awesome, and I wish that my friend or my spouse was here to hear this? You know what I'm talking about. And that is great, except that you are in their life and you have that opportunity to prayerfully involve yourself in Bible studies so that we can share our insights with others. You can tell them what God has revealed to you. So content is important in our relationships. It is what feeds us. And it is each of our responsibilities to have that role in others' lives. And there's another angle for us to look at along these lines, and that is that if words are food, then like what kind of nutrition are we dishing out? Is it the kind of thing that you have to say, like, is it sustaining? Or is it like fast food, junk food? Maybe you ought to ask yourself that question. Is the stuff that I'm putting out there sustaining to that other person's soul? Or are we just collapsing into like superficial, just vanilla conversation all the time? So another proverb. This is 16:24. It says, "Pleasant words are a honeycomb, sweet to the soul, and healing to the bones." So we've got apt words, we've got words that feed. Now we're talking about words that heal. Seem like those would be pretty important words. In the Bible, the biblical truth speaks to our brokenness. The reality is that we are all twisted and broken people. We live in a fallen world, and this is not the way that God intended it. We are alienated from God, and that has affected all of us. There are things in our hearts that are just plain wrong. There are choices that we've made that have affected the course of our life down a path that is very not cool in some cases. It is a painful path. It is hurtful to ourselves and to the people around us. There are habits of our heart that we are sometimes not even aware of. We're selfish, and we are squeezing the life out of the people around us. And we wonder why we don't have the sense of closeness that we once had. And the reason is because of you and because of me. It's because of both of us. We are both empty sponges that are seeking to suck the life out of one another. We are broken. And the author of Proverbs says that words can heal that brokenness. Paul says the same thing in Colossians 4:6, where he says, "Let your speech always be with grace, as though seasoned with salt, so that you can know how to respond to each person." So that is God's solution for us all, right? Grace is the triumph of mercy and the adequacy of Christ's sacrifice. The central need in the life of every human being is to personally experience the grace of God. The proclamation that the Bible makes and that resonates with our experience is that we are guilty and we are alienated from God, and we are completely unable to make ourselves adequate to a holy God. And the good news of the Scripture is that God knows this, and he has dealt with that problem personally. He has entered into this broken world, and in the cross, he has taken upon himself the guilt of all humanity. He has taken all of your sin. There is no way that you can pay for this yourself. In fact, if you really want to pay for your own sins, then God has arranged hell for you, and you're allowed to go there. But please, please don't make that choice. You don't need to. All you need to do is entrust God in the adequacy of his sacrifice for the guilt that you carry. And it is the cross of Christ that is the triumph of God's mercy over our sin. He has taken judgment upon himself so that you don't have to experience that judgment. And that is essentially the Christian message. But it goes on further, right? The Christian life reflects the adequacy of Christ's sacrifice, assuring us that despite our brokenness and sinful habits, we are absolved and will not face judgment. God's grace also allows us to experience his forgiveness and his reconciliation daily as we trust him with the specifics of our flawed lives. So there is real healing that happens in the life of a person who comes to that place where they can really lay their burdens down and admit the ulcerous nature of their own heart. And as we can communicate with each other about this kind of interaction, we really can produce words that heal. And we can limp through life together and learn what it means for us to trust Christ with these terrible things that weigh us down all the time. And so, will you graciously move toward where things are broken in people's lives? So this is a decision that you need to make. Maybe you think that you do not like to cause waves, right? Maybe you don't like to stick your nose where it's not wanted. We have all manner of excuses, but the real truth is that we are too selfish to care about what is wrong with some other person. Have you taken the time to prayerfully consider how your words or your silence may be motivated by maintaining your own comfort in the relationship? Are you willing to risk in order to potentially bring healing to someone else's life? Healing words come from those who stand beside the broken, reflecting how God has stood beside them. God has moved graciously towards me, so why can't I move graciously towards you? It's pretty inconsistent of us to withhold that same kind of grace and affection from other people. You see what I'm talking about? All right, so he also says in that same verse that words are sweet to the soul. So there are words that are sweet, words that elevate our perspective. The way that Paul says it is like this in Philippians 4:8. If there is any excellence and anything worthy of praise, dwell on these things. So, where's your head? What are you thinking about? Because that is going to determine what it is that you say. So Paul is saying that we have got to get our heads wrapped up in the things that are excellent, the things of God. So are your words often cynical and unbelieving? Mine are. This is a real struggle in my life. I can be pretty cynical, and I think of things in a very naturalistic way, more of cause and effect versus the miraculous hand of God. And I don't think that I'm alone in this. We are in a cynical culture, and most of you can be pretty cynical. And by that I mean that we do not believe in the ongoing real work of God in our midst. We can't even see the sweet things that are going on in the lives of the people around us because we're so cynical and they just pass us by. So when things get difficult or we're going through growing pains, where's our head at? Are we focused on how things aren't the way that they used to be and I don't like that? Do you complain much? Do you negatively relate with people that you've formed relationships with? Or are we focused on the fact that people's lives are being changed and grown to care for people around them in a way that is new? God is working in the lives of the people around us, and maybe even you right now, shaping our hearts for compassion and using our story to inspire hope in others. But are we so cynical that we're still trying not to see these amazing things that God continues to do in our lives, in the lives of the people around us? We need to keep our minds glued on the things of above. We need to think of things from God's perspective, because then you will have something to say that is sweet to the people that hear you, instead of the bitter stuff that people get from us now. I mean, if you're anything like me. So this is very important. If our head is where it needs to be, then our words are going to provide the hope that our lives are under God's sovereign care. Is that what we're generally communicating? Is that what rolls off our tongue in conversation? That God is in control? That as hard as things get, things are still in His hands? And that there is a reason for hope? And this is an area where we can all lead and we can do a lot better than we do. It is the mark of the cynic that they cannot sit down consistently and say that there are so many things to be thankful for that I really don't know where to even begin. So do you have trouble thinking about things to be thankful for? How about the fact that you're not in hell right now? So God has been merciful towards you. How about that there are people in your life that you've not yet alienated by your sinfulness and that they want to be your friends still? There are lots of things to be thankful for. And if we start from that place and we have a real sense of gratitude for the goodness of God, our conversations with other people will naturally move from the trivial and the vanilla to how cool it is what God is doing in the lives of people. That we are really thankful for those people in our lives. And that is going to have this stimulating effect on the other person. And they're going to be able to see things from that perspective. And this is like a contagious effect. It spreads to the whole community. This dynamic gives life to the body. And finally, we have words that make peace. So Proverbs 15:1 says, "A gentle answer turns away wrath, but a harsh word stirs up anger. The tongue of the wise makes knowledge acceptable." So a gentle answer turns away wrath, which means that our words can restore broken relationships. You all live with an imperfect person, and so do they. And imperfect people living in close contact means conflict. It's unavoidable. And problems, and sometimes you don't always get along. You know what I'm talking about. And what this proverb is saying is that in the midst of the conflict, speaking in humility and kindness turns the volume down on that conflict. But for some of us, we are so accustomed to being sarcastic and cynical, at least me. I feel like I'm talking to me here. And the people around us are so accustomed to hearing that from us that even when we try to respond in humility and kindness, we drip with sarcasm. Like maybe we don't mean it, but that's what the other person hears. So if I say something like, "Thank you so much for bringing this egregious behavior of mine to my attention," right? You will assume I'm being sarcastic. I mean, I was kind of laying it on thick there, but no matter what I actually mean, because that is the way that I've set things up in our relationship. And maybe you've done that too. We have to turn this around. How about if we try to be the first to apologize and to forgive? You know, like, "You're right, honey. I'm sorry. Will you forgive me?" You know, like even that, it's like, it sounds sarcastic, doesn't it? Like there's something so wrong with that. It's hard to say that you are guilty and need forgiveness. And when you do manage to say it, it can't be received because it is inconceivable that you would even be sincere. And besides, most of the time, we don't really want people to forgive us. Like our motivation most of the time is that we want them to understand why we did the thing that we did, not forgive us for doing it. So a gentle answer seeks common ground. The problem that you're having in your relationship does not define who you are. It doesn't even define your relationship. And I'm sure at times it feels heavy and weighty. But you need to go to a place where you have common ground. The God of the universe loves you both, and you're both made in his image, and you both share his spirit. And we have a real basis to appropriate this love and forgiveness for this relationship. And then we can build from there. That is a gentle word. And then, like, are you prone to gossip or take sides or rush to judgment? If so, recognize that this approach also is not gentle or effective in turning away wrath. If anything, it often deepens division. You may not be as helpful as you think you are. So don't choose the easy, comfortable path of like conspiring with others, and instead consider like approaching the individual directly with a gentle word. All right, so let's apply this real quick. So we have an opportunity with our mouth to do some good. In 1 Corinthians 14, Paul talks about the fact that our experience in Christian community can be dynamic, and it can be energizing, and it can be effective. When we are in the context of people that understand the teaching of James and the Proverbs on this, we're in a super cool environment because people are trying to figure out how they can serve by what they say. And we're all being ministered to in that environment and discipled by one another. We show up prepared and we want to share. I think I might have skipped one early. Yeah, I did. I'm going to go back. But some of us find ourselves feeling pretty passive. We don't even realize that the things that we've been describing this morning as they're like a part of our lives and a part of our thinking. And for us, our experience with the people around us is rather disengaged and is pretty forgetful and mostly boring. But you can do something about that. But it has to begin with you. So here is that verse that I just pulled up, 1 Corinthians 14:26. When you get together, each one has a psalm, a teaching, a revelation, and a tongue and interpretation. Let everything be done to build one another up. So you see, if we could just get that down, we would be in a great place. And this brings together this whole idea of what we do with our words. He says that when we come together, it's not just some of us, but each one of us contributes. And you don't have to be a Bible scholar or amaze us with your dizzying intellect. You just have to be a person that's interacting with God. It may be an insight or a reflection, and it says that everything be done to build each other up. So it's all done with this desire to serve, and we serve by bringing something that is worth hearing. And that means that some of us are going to have to do some work. We're going to have to work some of this stuff out. We're going to have to turn from a focus on ourselves and how we feel or how we compare, because that focus leads to silence. We either think that the things we have to say are not worth hearing, or we think that the people we have to say things to are not worth the things that we have to say. And either way you fall on that spectrum, you're wrong. There's a great deal of silence that goes on in all kinds of settings, and maybe we need to think about that. So maybe you think like me often that you don't know what to say. How about try asking a question, right? You're too selfish to prepare something to say, as I am often, but I can ask how things are and I can actually mean it. And then the next time we see each other, we have something to talk about that's real, because I need to follow up on that thing that I asked you the last time we got together. The Boy Scouts have taught us to be prepared, and that really does apply to us. It is exciting to be around people who want to share. It is life-giving for the community. And if people are coming because they have something to give, that is much different than everybody just shows up to get something. The idea is not that everybody would just sit there and receive their dose of nourishment. The idea is that we are nourished as we learn to serve those around us. So try it at some point in the week. Grab some content, get with God, and then think about what it would look like to share what God makes clear to you, or share the questions that it raises for you. This is going to create that dynamic for this community that we talked about a minute ago. And try building a truth-centered relationship where you can come alongside someone in an ongoing way You can share the things that God is teaching you, and you can hear those things from the other person as well. And this becomes a partnership. And really, this community should look like an intricate network of those kinds of partnerships that are cultivated to varying degrees. And people are sharing, right? I don't know if I've said this out here. I don't know if I've said this out loud before, but somebody one time shared this picture of what like heaven and hell looks like, and it's just an example. But it's like these two groups of people, and they're both sitting around a gigantic pot of soup, and each person has a ladle that's like way too long. Like it's huge. It's massive. It's like an oar instead of a spoon. And so if you look at the two groups of people, like the group in heaven, they look like, you know, they just look satisfied and they're happy and they're healthy looking and their skin is nice, you know, like all that stuff. Like clearly they've been eating, right? And then the group in hell is like, they're like famished, and you can see like ribs on their, you know, like their bones are sticking out, like they're not nourished. And the group in hell is trying to scoop out of the pot and feed themselves with it, but it's too big. So like as they turn the spoon towards their face, like it's just spilling all over the place. And the group in heaven is scooping the soup and they're feeding their neighbor. And it's going around in a circle like that so that everyone is fed. And like when I was preparing for this, it was like that was kind of the image that I was getting of like sharing with each other these words, these important things that God is doing in our life. So that's where we're going to land today. That's our discussion on the tongue from James.